that a monopoly of a certain ideology is a significant harm to a democracy, and that's what we're trying to prevent here. For the sake of the motion, we as a proposition are going to assume that high officers in the army are in defense of secularism within these countries. How are we going to do that? We are not going to do it forever, but we think that we need time for the necessary socio-economic developments in these countries and development of certain significant institutions, such as jurisdictions, such as political parties in opposition, allowing them time to get organized and allowing them to obtain some political power as well. How are we doing this? By using the threat of coups, by using the threat of use of force. How are we going to do this by using these means? We are going to, for example, ask them to remove extreme Islamist individuals from the political discourse, from the public discourse regarding political matters. We are going to force the government, for example, not to implement anti-democratic Islamist legislation. For example, we are going to force the Awdal party in the government in Egypt to rule out Salafis, to rule out the extreme Islamist individuals out of the party. We are going to prevent them from passing legislation regarding preventing girls from access to school, from preventing minorities to enjoy certain significant principal rights. I have 3 points. Firstly, I'll tell you that newly democratic states are not ready for full-fledged democracy, and I'm going to explain the mechanism. Secondly, I'll tell you what happens when there's no competition regarding the diversity of political ideologies, ideas within a society. And thirdly, I'm going to explain how army is going to be the right institution to fix that stuff. So first point, newly democratic states are not ready for full-fledged democracies. Why? Because we believe that in these states there is a monopoly of political power by the Islamists. For example, in Tunisia, there is a faction opposition, and all of the parties in that opposition are terribly minority. But on the contrary, we have Al-Nahda, which is over 40% of the public vote. In Egypt, we see that the Constituent Assembly is ruled by Islamists with a ratio of 3/3, and we believe that that's a really majoritarian issue. We believe that in Libya, the situation is not as transparent, but we can rightly assume that the situation is no worse. So we believe that the Islamists are majority, and the opposition against them is not only minority, but also not organized, because they haven't had any of the opportunities to let a political party gain some sort of organization, to let it actually use them to try to develop its political power. Why do we have that? Because we didn't have the
the hearts of people, and secondly, how religion, by being the atmosphere in the country, will help people and prosper in that sense. But before that, I would like to answer my friend's very unique proposition. Okay, as I mentioned in the POI, they have a problem with the size of the parties. Like, a functioning democracy cannot be with the large party system. As I mentioned, the United States is one of the oldest democracies in the world. They have two-party systems, and of course, one party has more than 50%. Why it's important? Because it's not the size of the parties that decide if the country is a perfect democracy or not. A democracy is determined when the rules of the game are entrenched in the hearts of people. And everyone accepts if the other opinion won, then everyone accepts the rules. The United States has this legacy, and we believe that this is a very unique legacy in the new democracies. Why do we need to further entrench it in their hearts as well? I'll talk about it in my argument. She said that people respect the military, and the military by many of those actions, everyone will agree. We do not agree at all. I think we trust them at the moment because the military defend the country from outside threats, and because outside threats are exactly the thing that people unite behind the army. But when the military force people to do something they don't want to do, it, people chose someone according to their ideology, and then the military forced the government to do something else. This is not a favorable thing for the people towards the army, and secondly, it can jeopardize the trust of the people in the army, so it can have a negative implication towards outside threats as well. Another thing, what happens, what happens when someone opposes the military? We know the military is very powerful, they have force. Do they put them in prison, they torture them, they overthrow the government? We think it's very important to mention how the rules of engagement are going to be between those groups, because we think blood is going to be spilled, and this is of course not very good for a newly democracy to have a civil war. She also talked about self-definition, why people will always identify as religious. We say people will identify as religious, but in addition they can identify as nation. You can see the example of Egypt. Egypt has a large Christian minority. They both consider themselves as Egyptian. No one says this is not Egyptian, the other is Egyptian. They're all Egyptian, they're associated as Egyptians, but some is Muslim, some is Christian, and we think those both things can work at the same time. I will go to my successful material, how to bring democracy into the hearts of people. So we have to talk about, which country? I think Egypt is the perfect example. We're talking about a big country, we have the democracy that had a lot of time of dictatorship. And what happened in those countries, and in our countries, they did have elections. Okay? They did have elections where Mubarak had 99.9% of the votes. It's called the Democratic Republic. And people didn't believe in their vote. They knew that when they go to vote, it doesn't really matter because he's getting elected the same time over again. Everything is free. So we think it's very important that when people look to vote, they will actually going to see the change in their lives, because we have to make them believe that the system, the behavior system that it works is the most important thing. So for example, if I vote for an Islamic party, I would like to have a little bit more religion in my life. Maybe I would like to have, instead of Turkey having Sundays days off, maybe Friday I would like to have a day off. This is exactly the kind of things that I'm going to see change in my life according to the votes I'm voting. So when those people see their life changes according to their vote, they start to believe in the rules of the game. And we think this is the most important thing. Why is the most important thing? Because we want to entrench democracy. We don't want democracy to be forced on people, and then they react because they will see the democracy they promised them, the rule of the people. So imagine the military forces upon them some changes. What happens? The military. So when the military forces secular idea, what it means that the military forces ideas of the minority on the majority. This is not a democracy they were promised. And what happens? They lose this belief in their hearts in this democracy. And this way, without this belief, democracy cannot work. And why cannot work? Because when you have democracy works when the majority decides for everyone. This is democracy. If we have a country where 90% describe themselves as advocate Muslims, we would ask even the minority to respect that having a more Muslim country and not the military forces everyone ideas which are not accepted by the majority. Yes?
So how about the trust of a Coptic minority who will be oppressed in your Islamist Sharia regime? Will they trust the democracy that you are
At the moment, we see in Egypt that there is no Coptic party because they don't see religion as an important factor. They But if Coptic would like to see their life according to their religion, they will make a party, and there will be discussion in the parliament. And you know what? Maybe in the beginning, maybe Islamists will have more power. But we're saying once democracy stretches people's hearts, then the rest of the rules will also come because we talk to each other. Everything is on the media. If there is a law they don't like, they oppose. Maybe they will accept this position. But for the first time, we can talk and we can see that there is opposition. I'll go to my other argument about why it's important for religion to be for the majority rule to be one of how the country behaves. But in this case, it's religion because we're talking about religious countries. Think about the person. This person lives in a country that is doing exactly by the majority. For most people, we have economy, we have happiness, we have all the kinds of aspects of our life because the majority of people, which the majority of happiness, the majority of people who enjoy this economy, they see everything around them behave the way they see their life. For example, Islam is all over the place. There is Islamic banking, there is Islamic charity. What if my country behave exactly the same I see it? It motivates me to work even better because I know that by doing those actions, I'm also serving the cause of God. This is my belief. And secondly, I'm trying to be more productive because when I'm happy, when I see everything around me is exactly set to my ideology, and I agree with everything around me, I have more incentive to share it with everyone and go around. We think in religious cases it's very important because in many cases religious authority can also tell people how to live their lives. And if people believe that religious authority can do that, so if their state of religion is the same, so there is more motivation to follow the rule of law. And in summarizing my case, I would say that this is two main things of democracy. The people who turn to their exchange their way of life. And secondly, that there is a rule of law that they accept, they listen to the government. All those reasons are logical.
Okay. Our line of argumentation is quite simple. We say power corrupts. Islamists have lots of power. We should deny them the power, and there is no other institution to deny them power. So we say army should do it. That's quite simple. I'm going to talk about two things. Firstly, I'm going to analyze the backlash maybe the opposition would like to talk about, which would be about trust, the system, whatever. But secondly, I'm going to talk about what will eventually happen if we don't do this, and how compromise and mainstream politics can, in our system, flourish thanks to the intervention of the army. But first, I have two words. Firstly, now the government, the opposition gave us an example of United States in the analogy with, Egypt. It is quite, bizarre to say that the chances of, the Republican Party to have Mitt Romney elected would be equal to the Coptic minority to elect its president as the Egyptian president, ladies and gentlemen. We say in the United States there is a fair balance of power between political parties. In Egypt or Tunisia, there is not. And Seda has already told you about it. We heard no engagement on side opposition. Secondly, they characterize Islamic parties' politics such as, well, look, they can legislate, for example, Islamist banks or, change the holidays, whatever. We don't think this would be the basis for, the intervention of the army, but we are talking about different things. For example, how about, denying your girls to go to school, for instance? Only, having in media Islamists or in education, ladies and gentlemen. How about denying, for instance, minorities to practice their religion, or furthermore, to try to convert other people, ladies and gentlemen, which is also a religious liberty, right? These things will not be in a fully dominant Islamist state, and they never engage in those points. I'll take those. Yes.
What will happen to the trust of people in democratic institutions if a democratically elected Islamic leader is dragged to prison by the military?
There is already no trust in democratic institutions because the reason is the democratic institutions that these guys are talking about are being held by Islamists who are more prone to be corrupt and abuse this power. They constantly say democracy is great. We agree that in general. However, the concept we are talking about is particularly different. First point, backlash. The there is still space and legitimacy for the army to intervene. We agree to some point that Islamists can be in power, in positions of power, ladies and gentlemen, but they should not be extremely Islamists, for example, such as in the case of Turkey, where we had a mildly Islamist power, a mildly Islamist government in place, but we don't have an extremist government in place which addresses the rights of religious minorities or secular minorities who disagree with their ideology. What we say is that even if some extremist group will be mad about those things, well, the majority will think that okay, there is some intervention, but still the main bulk of my ideology is still in place, right? Since there will be a mighty Islamist party in the government. How this does change? In order to have, if these guys are going to have an argument like that Islamists are going to blow everything up, they need some kind of public huge dissent, right? There won't be that in our systems. The majority of their interests, majority of their demands, legitimate demands by the Islamists will be met even in our the more we tell you is this: Islamists are also, ladies and gentlemen, tired of those struggle with the army and stuff. They reach to the positions of power. They are happy about it. We say it is unlikely, ladies and gentlemen, they are going to risk all of the things that they get after quite a lot of years by risking a coup, which is the total loss of everything they gained after all those kinds of struggle, right? So at the end of the day, we will see compromise which will be in favor of liberal politics and secularism, which we think both sides will agree, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Threat democracy, what will happen if we go with this? The problem is there is no genuine competition in those circumstances. Why? Because as said out of the opposition parties, which is the main issues, the main institutions of check and balances in a normal democracy, is not in place, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, there are parties, but those parties are not organized. They don't have ideologies. Even if they do ideologies, people don't, ladies and gentlemen. In order to have full-fledged democracy, people and voters should have different ideologies, different identities, multiple identities, so that we can have swing voters, ladies and gentlemen, right? For example, a person should identify himself as a Muslim, but at the same time with his profession, for example, or his social rights, right? So that he can swing parties defending other things. However, since we have a lack of socio-economic development in those countries, people primarily identify themselves as Muslims only. That's why we don't have swing voters. That's why we will have continuous governments of Islamists and furthermore extreme Islamists if they will eventually with elections altogether. How this policy changes the things? We say at the moment the Islamist parties have this kind of cost and benefit analysis. If they abuse their power, they will make their groups which voted for them heavy. They will make them more privileged. They may even curb the rights of political representation of the minorities to even get more power. And at the end of the day, they won't lose votes because people will continue to vote for them. How this policy changes? They will risk a coup, ladies and gentlemen. And for that reason, they will compromise. And at the end of the day, we will have mainstream parties who will be backed by the people who want more jobs, who want stability in their country. And at the end of the day, we will have parties who are tolerant, parties who accept secularism, and at the end of the day, a healthy public discourse, not based on religion doctrinization, but through ideas, projects, and social policy. For all these reasons, we are proud to propose.
Mr. Speaker, as a true Democrat, I am proud to stand on side opposition. Why? Because the problem we have been shown is that if there is some sort of religious ideology, then we cannot have a self-governing. We say no. We say that a true government, a true democracy is giving the people what they want. Right now, something upon them
for, extremist demands of the majority. Which
I already explained my point. You can protect the minorities by setting rules. You don't need to ban religion at all. You cause the right of radicals. So as I explained, you must understand the difference between Islam and Islamism. I think that Israel, which you have brought up, is exactly the case because we do have rights for minorities, although we have some sort of religious values like Sabbath as the day of rest and kosher food in public places. But also we have a discourse, a democratic discourse about religion and how it can be manifested. It is always a debate. Now what you say, you don't want a debate. You want a democratic. Why? Because when there won't be discourse, when people will be afraid to be who they are, then only the people that are not afraid of the military, only people that we feel that they can rally others against and bring them some sort of cause. And this is actually something believable because, as you have said, it is a new democracy. They still don't necessarily understand all the values. Then you have all the radicals preaching in the street and saying, "Oh, your government is ignoring you. We will bring this new future. We will bring a future when you can be religious," but they also bring the horrible stuff that you wanted to avoid. They also hurt other minorities. They also hurt other people, but they are the only ones that are not afraid to be hurt. And once people are scared, once people feel that the government is not really their own, they will rally around the flag that is offered to them. So, what have we shown? We've shown you that you are hurting human rights. We are showing you that there won't be a new government under this coercion. We have shown you that it will cause the right of radicals, and we have shown you that this is simply better.
Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do in my speech is, first of all, I'm going to explain why we believe that secularity is a prerequisite of a functioning democracy. We believe that you should be down this debate. Second of all, we are going to explain to you why we believe that the religious majority of these countries will accept our methods, will accept that the military secures the secularity. And third of all, I'm going to explain why we believe that this is a prerequisite for the fight of women, for the implementation of women's rights in these societies. And first of all, a little bit of rebuttal. The previous speaker said that democracy is giving people what the majority wants, that this is the very definition of democracy. We not totally agree on that. We believe that democracy is also about individual rights and is about that an ideology, which may even be shared by the majority, is not forced upon you. We believe this is a fundamental aspect of society that consider to be relevant here. We believe that therefore the aim of democracy right here that it produces for all citizens of a society generally acceptable outcomes. They can accept it because they understand and accept the process and the premises on which this is undertaken. I'm going to talk about that later. What happens to the radicals? Are we going to torture them? The answer is no, we just don't have to, because they will lose acceptance in the society. Why? Because for to be radical, they have to oppose the democratic system. We believe that for the population of this country, democracy is extremely important because they have a tremendous fight for it. Therefore, we will automatically oppose everyone who opposes democracy. Therefore, these radicals will become irrelevant. Then there has been the idea, is there a right to live in a religious state? The answer is no. If there was the right to live in a religious state, then the courts should also have this right. But this is obviously impossible. But we nevertheless believe that there's a right to be religious, that there's a right to undertake religious practices, and that we believe that obviously secularity does not mean that no one has a right to be religious, but you obviously can be religious in your private sphere. The Islamic, the Catholic, the whatever they may be possible. So, my first point, why do we believe that secularity is a basis of democracy? We have a problem with religiously grounded arguments, because they are not in a way intersubjectively interchangeable. Why? Because they are based on premises to which certain people have principally no access to, because they have not submitted to the ideology of the religion. We believe that therefore, for the people who submit to this religion, take these premises to be uncontestable, but they nevertheless have no basis of argument to come up with a democratic discourse in this society. Therefore, we believe that even if the majority share this premises, the arguments that I used to make these arguments sound plausible are no arguments which for the basic idea which is behind these arguments. Why do we believe it is a problem? Because we believe that democracy legitimizes itself through the acceptance of the whole society, with the principal possibility that people can understand what is going on there, that people can understand the argument and can principally understand how people came to their premises and can contest these premises with rational arguments. If we just take this rational idea out of the democratic discourse, there is no fundamental basis of discourse anymore, and democracy won't work anymore. Examples are, for example, religious teaching in schools and women's rights. We believe that therefore the arguments which are brought forward by Islamists, for example, are no arguments which can be contested within the rational framework of democracy. That we believe we have to put these arguments out of the democratic sphere. I take those.
How do you think the public will react to a military intervention, knowing that Nasser and Mubarak were both got into power as a result of a military coup?
That's perfect bringing into my second point, because we believe that there is not too much of a danger for a few dictator. Why do we believe that? Because we believe that this submission of the military to the democratic idea leads to a tight coupling between the constitution of these countries and the military. And this tight coupling has not also certain impacts on the whole society, but also impacts on the military itself. Because the military submitted itself to the ideology of democracy, to the idea of democracy, and to the concept that democracy and secularity are together and should be defended, that thereby are just acting in favor of a democratic constitution, that thereby gain acceptance in the society, and also that is an inner mechanism that the military is less likely to stage data in these countries. Why else do we believe that people will accept that the secularity in their countries? Because we believe that by granting secularism, we are also granting individual religious freedoms. We believe that it's incredibly important for these people because they have experienced that the religious freedom of not little minorities of the state is just taken away, or even that the religious freedom of majorities of the state is taken away. And therefore, if these people are granted now that their individual religious freedoms are held uncontestable in the future, because no politics can ever interfere with that, it leads to the result that they are going to accept it, even if they would love to like their religious state, they nevertheless are going to accept the security of individual rights because they don't take them for granted. Why do we believe this is incredibly important for women? Because this is incredibly important for women in their fight for the implementation of human rights, of women's rights, because we believe that they just don't work only on paper, they need some kind of practical implementation. For its practical implementation, you need women who stand up and to go to positions in the state and function there as role models. Therefore, they have to break up some traditional structures. We believe that to do this is always a certain risk, because it's much easier to work in the already established structures. We believe you don't have to make this more complicated. What we have to do is you have to secure this women that the right they are granted under the status quo are rights which are granted to them forever, because otherwise they are not willing to undertake the risk to now stand up for their individual rights, if they have the danger that in 2, 3 or 4 years a government is taking these rights away from them again, because it is implementing a non-secularistic religious state and taking them away. Then we have to offer them a long-term perspective, because if we don't offer them a long-term perspective, they are not willing to take the risk to fight for their rights. We believe that they should take the risk to fight for their rights, because we believe that these rights are rights. We never believe that they furthermore that secularism is a prerequisite for a functioning democracy, and that even the religious majority in these countries will accept secularism. For all these reasons, we beg you to propose.
Mr. Speaker, I find this proposition insulting because they call peoples who have fought for freedom in an honorable way brainless, suppressed by Islam. These are people that have fought for their own autonomy and fought for the ability to cast their own vote on what they believe is right, but they claim them as suppressed. We're going to show you that it's not true. We think this debate is pretty clear. Second government just spent their whole extension on talking about why secular values are important. We agree. But we're going to tell you about how on the ground secular values will be more upheld on our side of the house. Therefore, minorities they care about will be better off on our side of the house in the comparative. The first 2 points of view. First, I want to look at corruption. Because the first proposition was really worried about corrupt Islam Islamic parties. First, I'd like to ask, at what point exactly does the military stop intervening, as first proposition said? We think it's an incredibly vague line that they drew, namely, when institutions are built. What we think will happen is that the corrupt and power-hungry military that's often already present within these countries will argue that Islamists are always at the door, that they will use this as an excuse to keep the power the proposition is giving them. If you look at corruption, look at the Mubarak regime that stole billions and billions of its own people's funds. This is the height of corruption. You are keeping them in power. Then, secondly, they say, well, these Islamic parties are incredibly corrupt, democracy doesn't work. We say that this is factually untrue. Dozens of parties participated in Egyptian elections. There were election posters across Tahrir Square of all kinds of different strains of Islam, of secular parties, and they were discussing in every tea house. We got to see in every new Arab democracy an incredible discourse on Islam, on what Islam means, on what Islam means for rights for women. The result of that was that you saw moderate Islamic parties being victorious, because the ingrained fanatic Islamic narrative was drowned out by the actual perception of many people, namely that they really love their wife, really love their daughter, and want them to have equal rights. We saw that in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, elections were fair, democracy is getting on fine in these countries, and it's getting even better because the democratic support that proposition says doesn't exist is actually gaining because people see that now for the first time in 2 millennia, their vote counts. That's what we're actually seeing on this side of the house. And with that, I'll be moving into my first point of extension. I'll be talking about why currently within the status quo, the disposition of minorities is actually quickly improving. We say it's already better than it will get under the proposition. We say it's actually improving with every year. I'll take a bit of wine out of India.
Look, the existence of public discourse doesn't mean that it will be fruitful. The people living in those countries don't have multiple identities that would lead to swing voters. They identify themselves primarily Muslim, and they will vote for Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay. I was going to say this for my second part of the extension, but I'll get to it now. We say that you ingrain the aggressive economic Islamic narrative of the Islamists that you're actually afraid of. We say when this happens, that radical Islamists will say, see, you can't trust secularists. You can't trust the people that want rights for women because they do not trust you and me, they do not value our vote. You, me, we're Muslim. Because you're Muslim, I'm fighting for you. Not because you're a citizen, but because you're a Muslim. That means that you lock people into the Islam identity far more than they are now. What that also means is that this often happens in your model with extremist parties that go to the poorest of the poor. These are not the moderate parties you get into democracy I talk about, but the extremist parties. What that means is that, I'll illustrate this by saying that under Nasser and Mubarak in Egypt, you saw that the Muslim Brotherhood, and especially the extremist sects, got incredibly popular using this narrative. In that you and me are Muslims and we need to fight for Islamic freedom. The proposition problem, namely that Islam is incredibly popular, is actually caused by this model because people feel disenfranchised by the secularists that they're helping into power. Okay, so I'm going to go on with my first point of extension, namely that the position of minorities is rapidly improving. Firstly, there is a narrative of unity. New democracies were established as states where every vote counts. They were achieved as one nation, every citizen fighting for similar freedoms. That means that everybody who participated in this revolution, namely Muslim or Christian, is seen as a fellow citizen, as a brother who participated in the revolution for equal freedoms for all. We think that this decreases the abuse of minorities because they're no longer seen as foreign or different, but part of the same polity and therefore connected to you and me. This was illustrated by the Christian Copts who were protected by a line of people holding hands in Tahrir Square. These are the images we all saw on BBC News. They were so incredibly moving because for the first time, because actual democracy was established, Muslims were protecting Christians because they now saw each other as brothers and not as enemies with a different identity. Secondly, we argue that in a democracy, please sit down, in a democracy, these minorities that you're so afraid of are key constituencies. You saw that in every election, multiple Islamic parties participated and they all wanted to win. What that meant is that they often went to minorities, the Christian Copts, for example, are 10% of Egypt, which on the whole doesn't matter a lot, but to a single party does, because with that 10%, they can get the majority of the vote. That's why the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt made concessions toward the Christian Copts, saying, vote for us, I'm going to be the moderate guy, I'm going to respect your freedoms. That means that if all the minorities, which they will vote for the moderate Islamic cabinet or the secularist Islamic cabinet, they have immense political power vis-a-vis the majority when it comes to these competing political parties. Okay, then why will public attitudes change for the worse under their side of us? Two reasons. We say, firstly, that the institutions that are created under the military are seen as hijacked, are seen as corrupt. That means, for example, that the law won't be trusted anymore. That means that police officers won't enforce the basic protections that are already present under law. That means that the people in the street that you look at might insult you, might beat you, and then nobody will be there to protect you. We also say that the minorities will be as the cause of the secular regime, right? They will be the reason that you cannot cast your vote successfully, that you not can have the state you want, because the military uses them as an excuse. That will make them seen as enemies. That means that everybody, every day when you walk through the street, the people that you actually deal with, not what it says in the Constitution, but the people that you actually deal with won't hire you, won't like you, and will beat up your dog when you send her out at night. That's what happens on their side of the model. Our side of the model, Gary, makes sure that moderates come out in a good democracy where people feel expected. We uphold the narrative of unity that's currently present in democracies, whereas they ingrain aggressive Islam. That's why we do this.
Alright, I will talk about 2 points of crystallization in some arguments today. First of all, we will look on why this proposal actually fosters an inclusive form of democracy, which we think is the only legitimized form of democracy, because it gives as many individual freedoms from the state to its citizens. And secondly, I will talk about the impact on particularly these Arab societies and why we think it's rather likely that those Arab societies will accept this proposal and will be relatively moderate in the long run. But before in some words of rebuttal, I found that the idea of the closing government, that the opposition particularly was that, right now these minority groups are seen as brothers, therefore those countries will grant them in their constitutions, for example, individual rights, right? That was to some extent also opening opposition's idea, how we can actually protect these minorities. Unfortunately, they never made clear to us why these protections in these constitutions will be actually sustainable in the long run, particularly after the good material that came out of Jonas and in Jonas' speech, where he said that when you allow these radical religious parties to make mainly religious arguments, because they say that the state's politics can actually accommodate certain religious goals, which are quite likely to inflict exactly with these individual constitutional rights, like for example, that everyone should have the power to exercise their religious freedoms, for example. It's not necessarily clear why, for example, every religion should have their own schools, because we believe that these radical Islams then can, in the long run, actually bring in all their religious ideas, which kind of are similar to that of the majority of the society, and therefore undermine these constitutional rights in the long run, because they can poison more or less the majority of the society with their religious radicalism, which stands in exact opposition to all these minority rights they have under the status quo. And they unfortunately never gave us any analysis why actually this constitution will not simply be changed, for example, by the majority in the parliament, or for example, because these majority radical Islam parties can simply elect certain judges, which then kind of simply ignore certain constitutional rights in the constitution. We, on the other hand, believe that in order for these constitutional rights, which are likely to be implemented, to be sustained, we need the army to be a guardian of the secular constitution for a peaceful process. There you go.
Most democracies have religious democratic discourse in their law, like a prohibition of abortions in Ireland. Why don't you allow this in the Arab states? On the contrary, you want the army to caress something else.
I think the problem is that in these kind of more liberal Western states, when religious arguments come up, they're just seen as the kind of certain interests people have because of their religion. Not necessarily this kind of, it's a religious argument, therefore it's valid for everyone, no matter whether or not they accept this kind of religion or whether they themselves are part of this religion. Because we believe that, and that's exactly the crux of this debate and exactly the problem of this debate. Because once one majority in this democratic process holds certain religious ideas and is allowed to make arguments in the democratic process coming from these religious ideas, we think that it's unlikely that they are actually capable to build a compromise with minority parties who cannot share these arguments. As Jonas pointed out in his speech, the problem with religious arguments is that they are not rationally accessible by people who are not coming from the same background of these religions. Therefore, they cannot convince others, and they cannot the majority cannot convince others, and also the minority cannot be convinced by these religious arguments. We think that's extremely problematic, because then the majority and minority's interests will be simply overridden in the long run. What we think will rather happen under this proposal is actually because everyone is still interested in having religious freedoms. We think it's more likely, as Jonas pointed out in his speech, which was never contested by opposition, that actually everyone, because they see that they cannot make religious arguments in the democratic process, they will vote for massive individual rights, where people can actually, in their privacy, live up to their religion. And we think that in the long run will bring more inclusiveness and more plurality to those to every single individual in the democracy. And we think that's also legitimizing to some extent the state, because we believe that state's legitimacy derives from the idea that it accommodates as many individual and even conflicting interests, and no thank you, from the society. So what will this be accepted? I mean, I think, opposition painted this idea that this will create massive conflict within society. We think the opposite is true. Number one, because of Jonas' analysis, that many people will be quite happy if now we have this separation between state and religion, because this also means that the state cannot interfere with the religion of the majority, for example. We think the majority will very much like it, because they quite often experienced in the past, like for example in Syria, a rule of the Alawites, where their religion was overridden. And there's no analysis or no answer once again. Secondly, we believe it's quite likely because people right now seeing that democracy, they were fighting for democracy to some extent. And they see democracy as a great gift. We think that's why they will also accept the constitution with constitutional rights and as an extreme gift. And an army that sees itself as the guardian of these institutional rights. And therefore we believe that it's quite unlikely that actually that there will be not much acceptance and this massive civil war going on out of that. But even if this happens, I think opening proposition also gave you brilliant analysis that these Islamists actually are not interested in losing their power in the short run once they are empowered in this situation. And so therefore it gives the army the capacity to threaten some sort of coup, and therefore the Islamists will step back a little bit with their radical policies without all of a sudden mobilizing their forces and sending them against the army or something like that. Therefore we've showed you that actually the democratic process, particularly for people like women, for example, in society, is possible because their rights are included, and we believe that actually no civil war will break out for all these reasons. I'm back to you.
Mr. Speaker, we think we have a problem with the opposition case. Very simple. They presumed that Islam is strong enough to create a newly religious state with army checks and balances. We'll show you that if that presumption is true, we're actually going to create worse harms for minorities on the ground. And secondly, we're going to contest that notion and talk to you why positive discourse may happen, and show you why that positive discourse isn't going to happen as soon as the army can take control and say to a fraction of people who want to be elected, we're going to put you in jail, you have no right to go into discussion. Which means on both assumptions, we think they harm the way in which new democracy will operate, and they will harm the way in which people think about democracy, ultimately undermining the cause that these institutions need to provide and undermining the cause of minority rights. Two things. Firstly, will people accept the army under their world? Secondly, why is the status quo comparatively better at engaging with the idea of minority rights and secularism? Before that, just one brief point of rebuttal. None of the government side ever explained to you what Islamism definitely means that people want to try to oppress others. Closing government even accepted that the idea that they were all like minority rights corrupted with religion. We see no reason for that to have the military in place. That means that they undermine the presumption of opening government, who said that institutions aren't going to be ready. We presume that institutions will be voted in place because everyone wants them to vote in place. We think we need the court. Show no necessity for the military. Meaning that we can show any harm occurring from any military intervention. No thank you, we bring this to debate. So, will people accept this? What many analysts do, and we hear no response, is that there currently is a unifying narrative. People fall together for democracy. People work together. Copts and Muslims protect each other. And that's a very positive narrative to try and build democracy upon. What will happen in their world is they're going to disrupt that narrative for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we tell you, as soon as the military gets in and says to one of the Islamists or Salafists, you're not allowed to participate in an election. If you're going to stand on the street, become political active, or going to be elected, we're going to put you to prison. That means you send a message to the vast majority of the population, you don't have any right to participate in the democratic process. Your views, your arguments, your beliefs are not important enough, and we don't think they should hold any merit. We think that is incredibly damaging. Even if people may be secularists, there may be fear of the army and things that these guys may eventually argue for a religious state, which means they won't suddenly be part of democracy. That means that these people will feel disenfranchised by the fact that the new democratic institution, which gave them the promise that they would participate, is being discriminatory. We think that's damaging, because that means that these people won't accept democratic institutions. Secondly, we found you that there's already a widespread narrative that the armies are incredibly damaging. I asked them the why. What do you think the response will be when the military tries to play a coup? If some government tries to enact an Islamic State? Because we say that the military, firstly, can be corrupt, and it has very much been corrupt over the past years, both in the Gaddafi regimes in Libya and in Egypt. But secondly, was the instruction that led to the oppressive Mubarak regimes. We think many of the people will be very frightful of the military when they try to leave. Closing government told you, no, but they're going to be seen as observant to the Constitution. We actually don't think that's true. We think that many of the people, firstly, can think that the Constitution is used as an excuse to get to power. Secondly, don't trust that Constitution, and therefore don't trust the reason the military intervene. What harms does it bring? Many told you that the harms towards the minority rights aren't just that there are institutions that are using the damage people. The harms are fundamentally that people on the ground don't believe in the secularist project and will start to attack other people. We don't think the fundamental harm is institutions may oppress women. That's an end game that may happen. The harm is that on the street, people are unsafe for their lives, and violence against cops may flare again. We tell them at the moment they don't believe that we should all be in a society, but also that they can believe in the rhetoric that the cops are using the army to oppress the rest of the Islamic society like in Egypt. We think that may be damaging to the idea, and we think that violence against the cops may flare because we feel they're being oppressed by the cops and by other minorities through the use of the army. We think that's incredibly damaging to the way in which it operates. We think, in the end, that may lead to things like revolutions and opening up talks about. We just don't think it will lead to any way in positive discourse. I'll take you right now.
Okay, so you can see that in general secularism good. Don't you think that Muslim Brotherhood would be more able to make compromises in favor of secularism if there was not an extremist Islamist party who would accuse it as infidel thanks to the intervention of the army who would expel that party or candidates from the public discourse?
No. There are a couple of reasons. Firstly, we tell you the Muslim Brotherhood has majority support. They won't be passed by infidels, right? Because the majority of people in these nations aren't extremist Muslim. They will become extremist Muslim because they recognize, because they may be told by extremists under your world that the entirety of the Muslim ideals and the entirety of Muslim laws are threatened by the idea that army will come in. That can cause extremism. So we just don't think that that is true. We think the Muslim Party, furthermore, is the largest party currently, so they have lots of strengths there. So and also they can buy into the narratives that currently exist, that unified narrative, and create therefore strong people to do that. So why is that still valid? We tell you that because of that unified narrative, because many people fought for democracy, at that point in time, a positive discourse can engage about the merits of secularism. And that can make me happy. But even if it's not the case, we think a positive idea can emerge for like British law. We think, for instance, that Sharia law gives provisions to many minority people. That is why we see, that in states which have some British life, like the Christians are protected, like for instance in Syria at the moment. We tell you, fundamentally, we can engage with religious arguments. Those governments said, you cannot talk about religious arguments. You cannot comprehend that. Firstly, we think many religious arguments are similar. They draw from similar texts. Secondly, we don't even think that religious arguments are going to be made based on protected religion. They're mostly going to be made about the idea that living together, what kind of political solution you want to create. We think it's ultimately better. Because that means that people will learn first steps on the way to why democratic institutions are important, why they're not oppressive, why they go about and learn that in order for democracy to function, everyone has a say and a right to say, and everyone will participate. You undermine the idea that people will participate. We think we'll do violent reactions within the nations. We think that is part of minority rights, or the comparative, have some faith, and try to let them talk. We think it always leads to a better outcome. Be back to the